Chapter 8 of the Three Musketeers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 8, concerning a court intrigue. In the meantime, the 40 pistoles of King Louis XIII, like all other things of this world, after having had a beginning, had an end, and after this end our four companions began to be somewhat embarrassed. At first Athos supported the association for a time with his own means. Porthos succeeded him, and thanks to one of those disappearances to which he was accustomed, he was able to provide for the wants of all for a fortnight. At last it became Aramis's turn, who performed it with a good grace, and who succeeded, as he said, by selling some theological books, in procuring a few pistoles. Then, as they had been accustomed to do, they had recourse to Monsieur de Tréville, who made some advances on their pay. But these advances could not go far with 3 musketeers who were already much in arrears, and a guardsman who as yet had no pay at all. At length, when they found they were likely to be really in want, they got together, as a last effort, 8 or 10 pistoles, with which Porthos went to the gambling table. Unfortunately, he was in a bad vein. He lost all, together with 25 pistoles for which he had given his word. Then the inconvenience became distress. The hungry friends, followed by their lackeys, were seen haunting the quays and guard-rooms, picking up among their friends abroad all the dinners they could meet with, for according to the advice of Aramis, it was prudent to sow repasts right and left in prosperity, in order to reap a few in time of need. Athos was invited 4 times, and each time took his friends and their lackeys with him. Porthos had 6 occasions, and contrived in the same manner that his friends should partake of them. Aramis had 8 of them. He was a man, as must have been already perceived, who made but little noise, and yet was much sought after. As to D'Artagnan, who as yet knew nobody in the capital, he only found 1 chocolate breakfast at the house of a priest of his own province, and 1 dinner at the house of a cornet of the guards. He took his army to the priests, where they devoured as much provision as would have lasted him for 2 months, and to the cornets, who performed wonders. But, as Planchet said, people do not eat once for all time, even when they eat a good deal. D'Artagnan thus felt himself humiliated in having only procured 1 meal and a half for his companions, as the breakfast at the priest's could only be counted as half a repast, in return for the feasts which Athos, Porthos, and Aramis had procured him. He fancied himself a burden to the society, forgetting in his perfectly juvenile good faith that he had fed this society for a month. And he set his mind actively to work. He reflected that this coalition of 4 young, brave, enterprising, and active men ought to have some other object than swaggering walks, fencing lessons, and practical jokes, more or less witty. In fact, 4 men such as they were, 4 men devoted to one another, from their purses to their lives, 4 men always supporting one another, never yielding, executing singly or together the resolutions formed in common, 4 arms threatening the 4 cardinal points, or turning toward a single point, must inevitably, either subterraneously, in open day, by mining, in the trench, by cunning or by force, open themselves a way toward the object they wished to attain, however well it might be defended, or however distant it may seem. The only thing that astonished D'Artagnan was that his friends had never thought of this. He was thinking by himself, and even seriously racking his brain to find a direction for this single force 4 times multiplied, with which he had no doubt, as with the lever for which Archimedes sought, they should succeed in moving the world, when some one tapped gently at his door. D'Artagnan awakened Planchet and ordered him to open it. From this phrase, D'Artagnan awakened Planchet, the reader must not suppose it was night, or that day was hardly come. No, it had just struck 4. Planchet, 2 hours before, had asked his master for some dinner, and he had answered him with the proverb, "He who sleeps dines," and Planchet dined by sleeping. A man was introduced, of simple mien, who had the appearance of a tradesman. Planchet, by way of dessert, would have liked to hear the conversation, but the citizen declared to D'Artagnan that, what he had to say being important and confidential, he desired to be left alone with him. D'Artagnan dismissed Planchet and requested his visitor to be seated. There was a moment of silence, during which the 2 men looked at each other as if to make a preliminary acquaintance, after which D'Artagnan bowed, as a sign that he listened. "I have heard Monsieur d'Artagnan spoken of as a very brave young man," said the citizen, "and this reputation which he justly enjoys has decided me to confide a secret to him." "Speak, monsieur, speak," said D'Artagnan, who instinctively scented something advantageous. The citizen made a fresh pause, and continued, "I have a wife who is seamstress to the queen, monsieur, and who is not deficient in either virtue or beauty. I was induced to marry her about 3 years ago, although she had but very little dowry, because Monsieur Laporte, the queen's cloak-bearer, is her godfather, and befriends her." "Well, monsieur?" asked D'Artagnan. "Well," resumed the citizen, "well, monsieur, my wife was abducted yesterday morning, as she was coming out of her workroom." "And by whom was your wife abducted?" "I know nothing surely, monsieur, but I suspect someone." "And who is the person whom you suspect?" "A man who has pursued her for a long time." "The devil! But allow me to tell you, monsieur," continued the citizen, "that I am convinced that there is less love than politics in all this." "Less love than politics?" replied D'Artagnan, with a reflective air. "And what do you suspect?" "I do not know whether I ought to tell you what I suspect." "Monsieur, I beg you to observe that I ask you absolutely nothing. It is you who have come to me. It is you who have told me that you had a secret to confide in me. Act, then, as you think proper. There is still time to withdraw." "No, monsieur, no, no, no. You appear to be an honest young man, and I will have confidence in you. I believe, then, that it is not on account of any intrigues of her own that my wife has been arrested, but because of those of a lady much greater than herself." Ah, can it be on account of the amours of Madame de Bois Tracy?" said D'Artagnan, wishing to have the air, in the eyes of the citizen, of being posted as to court affairs. "Higher, monsieur, higher!" "Of Madame d'Aiguillon?" "Still higher!" "Of Madame de Chevreuse?" "Of the—" D'Artagnan checked himself. "Yes, monsieur," replied the terrified citizen, in a tone so low that he was scarcely audible. "And with whom?" "With whom can it be, if not the Duke of—" "The Duke of—" "Yes, monsieur," replied the citizen, giving a still fainter intonation to his voice. "But how do you know all this?" "How do I know?" "Yes, how do you know it? No half-confidence, or— You understand?" "I know it from my wife, monsieur, from my wife herself." Who learns it from whom? From Monsieur Laporte. Did I not tell you that she was the goddaughter of Monsieur Laporte, the confidential man of the Queen? Well, Monsieur Laporte placed her near Her Majesty in order that our poor Queen might at least have someone in whom she could place confidence. Abandoned as she is by the king, watched as she is by the cardinal, betrayed as she is by everybody. Ah, it begins to develop itself, said D'Artagnan. Now, my wife came home 4 days ago, monsieur. One of her conditions was that she should come home and see me twice a week, for, as I had the honor to tell you, my wife loves me dearly. My wife then came and confided to me that the Queen, at that very moment, entertained great fears. Truly, yes, the cardinal, as it appears, pursues her and persecutes her more than ever. He cannot pardon her the history of the Sarabande. You know the history of the Sarabande? Pardieu, know it, replied D'Artagnan, who knew nothing about it, but who wished to appear to know everything that was going on. So that now it is no longer hatred, but vengeance. Indeed. And the Queen believes... Well, what does the Queen believe? She believes that someone has written to the Duke of Buckingham in her name. In the Queen's name? Yes, to make him come to Paris, and when once come to Paris, to draw him into some snare. The devil! But your wife, monsieur, what has she to do with all this? Her devotion to the Queen is known, and they wish either to remove her from her mistress or to intimidate her in order to obtain Her Majesty's secrets, or to seduce her and make use of her as a spy. That is likely, said D'Artagnan. But the man who has abducted her, do you know him? I have told you that I believe I know him. His name? I do not know that. What I do know is that he is a creature of the cardinal, his evil genius. But you have seen him? Yes, my wife pointed him out to me one day. Has he anything remarkable about him by which one may recognize him? Oh, certainly. He is a noble of very lofty carriage, black hair, swarthy complexion, piercing eye, white teeth, and has a scar on his temple. A scar on his temple, cried D'Artagnan, and with that, white teeth, a piercing eye, dark complexion, black hair, and haughty carriage. Why, that's my man of Mung. He is your man, do you say? Yes, yes, but that has nothing to do with it. No, I'm wrong. On the contrary, that simplifies the matter greatly. If your man is mine, with one blow I shall obtain 2 revenges, that's all. But where to find this man? I know not. Have you no information as to his abiding place? None. One day, as I was conveying my wife back to the Louvre, he was coming out as she was going in, and she showed him to me. The devil, murmured D'Artagnan. All this is vague enough. From whom have you learned of the abduction of your wife? From Monsieur Laporte. Did he give you any details? He knew none himself. And you have learned nothing from any other quarter? Yes, I have received... What? I fear I am committing a great imprudence. You always come back to that, but I must make you see this time that it is too late to retreat. I do not retreat. Mordieu! Cried the citizen, swearing, in order to rouse his courage. Besides, by the faith of Bonacieux— You call yourself Bonacieux? Interrupted D'Artagnan. Yes, that is my name. Ah, you said, then, by the word of Bonacieux. Pardon me for interrupting you, but it appears to me that the name is familiar to me. Possibly, monsieur. I am your landlord. Ah, said D'Artagnan, half rising and bowing. You are my landlord? Yes, monsieur, yes. And as it is 3 months since you have been here, and though, distracted as you must be in your important occupations, you have forgotten to pay me my rent, as I say, I have not tormented you a single instant. I thought you would appreciate my delicacy. How can it be otherwise, my dear Bonacieux? Replied D'Artagnan. Trust me, I am fully grateful for your unparalleled conduct, and if, as I told you, I can be of any service to you, I believe you, monsieur, I believe you. And as I was about to say, by the word of Bonacieux, I have confidence in you. Finish, then, what you were about to say. The citizen took a paper from his pocket and presented it to D'Artagnan. "A letter?" said the young man. "Which I received this morning." D'Artagnan opened it, and as the day was beginning to decline, he approached the window to read it. The citizen followed him. "Do not seek your wife," read D'Artagnan. "She will be restored to you when there is no longer occasion for her. If you make a single step to find her, you are lost." "That's pretty positive," continued D'Artagnan. "But after all, it is but a menace." "Yes, but that menace terrifies me. I am not a fighting man at all, monsieur. I am afraid of the Bastille." Said D'Artagnan. "I have no greater regard for the Bastille than you. If it were nothing but a sword thrust, why then—" "I have counted upon you on this occasion, monsieur." "Yes?" "Seeing you constantly surrounded by musketeers of a very superb appearance, and knowing that these musketeers belonged to Monsieur de Tréville, and were consequently enemies of the cardinal, I thought that you and your friends, while rendering justice to your poor queen, would be pleased to play his Eminence an ill turn." "Without doubt." "And then I have thought that considering 3 months' lodging, about which I have said nothing—" Yes, you have already given me that reason, and I find it excellent." "Reckoning still further, that as long as you do me the honor to remain in my house, I shall never speak to you about rent." "Very kind." "And adding to this, if there be need of it, meaning to offer you 50 pistoles, if, against all probability, you should be short at the present moment." "Admirable! You are rich, then, my dear Monsieur Bonacieux?" "I am comfortably off, monsieur, that is all. I have scraped together some such thing as an income of 2,000 or 3,000 crowns at the haberdashery business, but more particularly in venturing some funds in the last voyage of the celebrated navigator Jean Moquet, so that you understand, monsieur—" "But," cried the citizen. "What?" demanded D'Artagnan. "Whom do I see yonder?" "Where?" "In the street, facing the window, in the embrasure of that door. A man wrapped in a cloak." "It is he!" cried D'Artagnan and the citizen at the same time, each having recognized his man. "Ah, this time," cried D'Artagnan, springing to his sword, "this time he will not escape me." Drawing his sword from its scabbard, he rushed out of the apartment. On the staircase he met Athos and Porthos, who were coming to see him. They separated, and D'Artagnan rushed between them like a dart. "Pah! Where are you going?" cried the 2 Musketeers in a breath. "The man of Meung," replied D'Artagnan, and disappeared. D'Artagnan had more than once related to his friends his adventure with the stranger, as well as the apparition of the beautiful foreigner, to whom this man had confided some important missive. The opinion of Athos was that D'Artagnan had lost his letter in the skirmish. A gentleman, in his opinion, and according to D'Artagnan's portrait of him the stranger must be a gentleman, would be incapable of the baseness of stealing a letter. Porthos saw nothing in all this but a love-meeting, given by a lady to a cavalier, or by a cavalier to a lady, which had been disturbed by the presence of D'Artagnan and his yellow horse. Aramis said that as these sorts of affairs were mysterious, it was better not to fathom them. They understood then, from the few words which escaped from D'Artagnan, what affair was in hand, and as they thought that overtaking his man or losing sight of him, D'Artagnan would return to his rooms, they kept on their way. When they entered D'Artagnan's chamber, it was empty. The landlord, dreading the consequences of the encounter which was doubtless about to take place between the young man and the stranger, had, consistent with the character he had given himself, judged it prudent to decamp. End of chapter 8.
LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Simon Taylor. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 9. D'Artagnan shows himself. As Athos and Porthos had foreseen, at the expiration of a half-hour D'Artagnan returned. He had again missed his man, who had disappeared as if by enchantment. D'Artagnan had run, sword in hand, through all the neighbouring streets, but had found nobody resembling the man he sought for. Then he came back to the point where, perhaps, he ought to have begun, and that was to knock at the door against which the stranger had leaned. But this proved useless, for though he knocked 10 or 12 times in succession, no one answered, and some of the neighbours, who put their noses out of their windows or were brought to their doors by the noise, had assured him that that house, all the openings of which were tightly closed, had not been inhabited for 6 months. While D'Artagnan was running through the streets and knocking at doors, Aramis had joined his companions, so that on returning home D'Artagnan found the reunion complete. "Well," cried the Three Musketeers all together, on seeing D'Artagnan enter with his brow covered with perspiration and his countenance upset with anger. "Well," cried he, throwing his sword upon the bed, "this man must be the devil in person. He has disappeared like a phantom, like a shade, like a spectre." "Do you believe in apparitions?" asked Athos of Porthos. "I never believe in anything I have not seen, and as I never have seen apparitions, I don't believe in them." "The Bible," said Aramis, "make our belief in them a law. The ghost of Samuel appeared to Saul, and it is an article of faith that I should be very sorry to see any doubt thrown upon, Porthos." "At all events, man or devil, body or shadow, illusion or reality, this man is born for my damnation. For his flight has caused us to miss a glorious affair, gentlemen, an affair by which there were 100 pistoles, and perhaps more, to be gained." "How is that?" cried Porthos and Aramis in a breath. As to Athos, faithful to his system of reticence, he contented himself with interrogating D'Artagnan by a look. "Planchet," said D'Artagnan to his domestic, who just then insinuated his head through the half-open door in order to catch some fragment of the conversation, "go down to my landlord, Monsieur Bonacieux, and ask him to send me 6 bottles of Beaugency wine. I prefer that." You have credit with your landlord, then?" asked Porthos. "Yes," replied D'Artagnan, "from this very day. And mind, if the wine is bad, we will send him to find better." "We must use and not abuse," said Aramis sententiously. "I always said that D'Artagnan had the longest head of the 4, said Athos, who, having uttered his opinion, to which D'Artagnan replied with a bow, immediately resumed his accustomed silence. "But come, what is this about?" asked Porthos. "Yes," said Aramis. "Impart it to us, my dear friend, unless the honour of any lady be hazarded by this confidence. In that case, you would do better to keep it to yourself." "Be satisfied," replied D'Artagnan. "The honour of no one will have cause to complain of what I have to tell." He then related to his friends, word for word, all that had passed between him and his host, and how the man who had abducted the wife of his worthy landlord was the same with whom he had had the difference at the hostelry of the Jolly Miller. "Your affair is not bad," said Athos, after having tasted like a connoisseur, and indicated by a nod of his head that he thought the wine good. "And one may draw 50 or 60 pistoles from this good man. Then there only remains to ascertain whether these 50 or 60 pistoles are worth the risk of 4 heads." "But observe," cried D'Artagnan, "that there is a woman in the affair, a woman carried off, a woman who is doubtless threatened, tortured perhaps, and all because she is faithful to her mistress." "Beware, D'Artagnan, beware," said Aramis. "You grow a little too warm, in my opinion, about the fate of Madame Bonacieux. Woman was created for our destruction, and it is from her we inherit all our miseries." At this speech of Aramis, the brow of Athos became clouded, and he bit his lips. "It is not Madame Bonacieux about whom I am anxious," cried D'Artagnan, "but the queen, whom the king abandons, whom the cardinal persecutes, and who sees the heads of all her friends fall, one after the other." "But why does she love what we hate most in the world, the Spaniards and the English?" "Spain is her country," replied D'Artagnan, "and it is very natural that she should love the Spanish, who are the children of the same soil as herself. As to the second reproach, I have heard it said that she does not love the English, but an Englishman." "Well, and by my faith," said Athos, "it must be acknowledged that this Englishman is worthy of being loved. I never saw a man with a nobler air than his." "Without reckoning that he dresses as nobody else can," said Porthos. "I was at the Louvre on the day when he scattered his pearls, and, pardieu, I picked up 2 that I sold for 10 pistoles each. Do you know him, Aramis?" "As well as you do, gentlemen, for I was among those who seized him in the garden at Amiens, into which Monsieur Putange, the Queen's equerry, introduced me. I was at school at the time, and the adventure appeared to me to be cruel for the king." "Which would not prevent me," said D'Artagnan, "if I knew where the Duke of Buckingham was, from taking him by the hand and conducting him to the Queen, were it only to enrage the cardinal, and if we could find means to play him a sharp turn, I vow that I would voluntarily risk my head in doing it." "And did the mercer," rejoined Athos, "tell you, D'Artagnan, that the Queen thought that Buckingham had been brought over by a forged letter?" "She is afraid so." "Wait a minute, then," said Aramis. "What for?" demanded Porthos. "Go on, while I endeavour to recall circumstances." "And now I am convinced," said D'Artagnan, "that this abduction of the Queen's woman is connected with the events of which we are speaking, and perhaps with the presence of Buckingham in Paris." "The Gascon is full of ideas," said Porthos with admiration. "I like to hear him talk," said Athos. "His dialect amuses me." "Gentlemen," cried Aramis, "listen to this." "Listen to Aramis," said his 3 friends. "Yesterday I was at the house of a doctor of theology, whom I sometimes consult about my studies." Athos smiled. "He resides in a quiet corner," continued Aramis. "His tastes and his profession require it. Now, at the moment when I left his house—" Here Aramis paused. "Well," cried his auditors, "at the moment you left his house?" Aramis appeared to make a strong inward effort, like a man who, in the full relation of a falsehood, finds himself stopped by some unforeseen obstacle. But the eyes of his 3 companions were fixed upon him, their ears were wide open, and there were no means of retreat. "This doctor has a niece," continued Aramis. "Ah, he has a niece," interrupted Porthos. "A very respectable lady," said Aramis. The 3 friends burst into laughter. "If you laugh, you doubt me," replied Aramis. "You shall know nothing." "We believe like Mohammedans, and are as mute as tombstones," said Athos. I will continue then, resumed Aramis. This niece comes sometimes to see her uncle, and by chance was there yesterday at the same time that I was, and it was my duty to offer to conduct her to her carriage. Ah, she has a carriage, then, this niece of the doctor, interrupted Porthos, one of whose faults was a great looseness of tongue. A nice acquaintance, my friend. Porthos, replied Aramis, I have had the occasion to observe to you more than once that you are very indiscreet, and that is injurious to you among the women. Gentlemen, gentlemen, cried D'Artagnan, who began to get a glimpse of the result of the adventure. The thing is serious. Let us try not to jest, if we can. Go on, Aramis, go on. All at once a tall, dark gentleman, just like yours, D'Artagnan. The same, perhaps, said he. Possibly, continued Aramis, came toward me, accompanied by 5 or 6 men, who followed about 10 paces behind him, and in the politest tone, Monsieur Duke, said he to me. And you, madame, continued he, addressing the lady on my arm, the doctor's niece. Hold your tongue, Porthos, said Athos. You are insupportable. Will you enter this carriage, and that without offering the least resistance, without making the least noise? He took you for Buckingham, cried D'Artagnan. I believe so, replied Aramis. But the lady? Asked Porthos. He took her for the Queen, said D'Artagnan. Just so, replied Aramis. The Gascon is the devil, cried Athos. Nothing escapes him. The fact is, said Porthos, Aramis is of the same height and something of the shape of the Duke, but it nevertheless appears to me that the dress of a musketeer— I wore an enormous cloak, said Aramis. In the month of July? The devil, said Porthos. Is the doctor afraid that you may be recognized? I can comprehend that the spy may have been deceived by the person, but the face— I had a large hat, said Aramis. Oh, good Lord, cried Porthos, what precautions for the study of theology! Gentlemen, gentlemen, said D'Artagnan, do not let us lose our time in jesting. Let us separate, and let us seek the mercer's wife. That is the key of the intrigue. A woman of such inferior condition, can you believe so? Said Porthos, protruding his lips with contempt. She is goddaughter to Laporte, the confidential valet of the Queen. Have I not told you so, gentlemen? Besides, it has perhaps been Her Majesty's calculation to seek on this occasion for support so lowly. High heads expose themselves from afar, and the cardinal is long-sighted. Well, said Porthos, in the first place make a bargain with the mercer, and a good bargain. That's useless, said D'Artagnan, for I believe if he does not pay us, we shall be well enough paid by another party. At this moment a sudden noise of footsteps was heard upon the stairs. The door was thrown violently open, and the unfortunate mercer rushed into the chamber in which the council was held. "Save me, gentlemen, for the love of heaven, save me!" cried he. "There are 4 men come to arrest me. Save me! Save me!" Porthos and Aramis arose. "A moment!" cried D'Artagnan, making them a sign to replace in the scabbard their half-drawn swords. "It is not courage that is needed, it is prudence." "And yet," cried Porthos, "we will not leave." "You will leave D'Artagnan to act as he thinks proper," said Athos. "He has, I repeat, the longest head of the 4, and for my part I declare that I will obey him. Do as you think best, D'Artagnan." At this moment the 4 guards appeared at the door of the antechamber, but seeing 4 musketeers standing, and their swords by their sides, they hesitated about going further. "Come in, gentlemen, come in," called D'Artagnan. "You are here in my apartment, and we are all faithful servants of the king and cardinal." "Then, gentlemen, you will not oppose our executing the orders we have received?" asked one, who appeared to be the leader of the party. "On the contrary, gentlemen, we would assist you if it were necessary." "What does he say?" grumbled Porthos. "You are a simpleton," said Athos. "Silence!" "But you promised me," whispered the poor mercer. "We can only save you by being free ourselves," replied D'Artagnan in a rapid, low tone, "and if we appear inclined to defend you, they will arrest us with you." "It seems, nevertheless—" "Come, gentlemen, come," said D'Artagnan aloud. "I have no motive for defending monsieur. I saw him today for the first time, and he can tell you on what occasion. He came to demand the rent of my lodging. Is that not true, Monsieur Bonacieux? Answer." "The very truth," cried the mercer. "But Monsieur does not tell you—" "Silence! With respect to me, silence. With respect to my friends, silence about the Queen above all, or you will ruin everybody without saving yourself. Come, come, gentlemen, remove the fellow." And D'Artagnan pushed the half-stupefied mercer among the guards, saying to him, "You are a shabby old fellow, my dear. You come to demand money of me, of a musketeer. To prison with him. Gentlemen, once more, take him to prison and keep him under key as long as possible. That will give me time to pay him." The officers were full of thanks, and took away their prey. As they were going down, D'Artagnan laid his hand on the shoulder of their leader. "May I not drink to your health, and you to mine?" said D'Artagnan, filling 2 glasses with the Beaugency wine, which he had obtained from the liberality of Monsieur Bonacieux. "That will do me great honour," said the leader of the posse, "and I accept thankfully." "Then to yours, monsieur. What is your name?" "Beaurenard." "Monsieur Beaurenard."
"To yours, my gentleman. What is your name in your turn, if you please?"
"D'Artagnan."
"To yours, monsieur."
"And above all others," cried D'Artagnan, as if carried away by his enthusiasm, "to that of the king and the cardinal." The leader of the posse would perhaps have doubted the sincerity of D'Artagnan if the wine had been bad, but the wine was good, and he was convinced. "What diabolical villainy you've performed here," said Porthos, when the officer had rejoined his companions, and the 4 friends found themselves alone. "Shame, shame for 4 musketeers to allow an unfortunate fellow who cried for help to be arrested in their midst, and a gentleman to hobnob with a bailiff." "Porthos," said Aramis, "Athos has already told you that you are a simpleton, and I am quite of his opinion. D'Artagnan, you are a great man, and when you occupy Monsieur de Tréville's place, I will come and ask your influence to secure me an abbey." "Well, I am in a maze," said Porthos. "Do you approve of what D'Artagnan has done?"
"Parbleu! Indeed I do," said Athos. "I not only approve of what he has done, but I congratulate him upon it."
"And now, gentlemen," said D'Artagnan, without stopping to explain his conduct to Porthos, "all for one, one for all. That is our motto, is it not?" "And yet," said Porthos.
"Hold out your hand and swear!" cried Athos and Aramis at once.
Overcome by example, grumbling to himself, nevertheless Porthos stretched out his hand, and the 4 friends repeated with one voice the formula dictated by D'Artagnan.
"All for one! One for all!"
"That's well. Now let us every one retire to his own home," said D'Artagnan, as if he had done nothing but command all his life. "And attention, for from this moment we are at feud with the cardinal." End of chapter 9.
Is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meredith Hughes, Cambridge, Massachusetts. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 10. A Mousetrap in the 17th Century. The invention of the mousetrap does not date from our days. As soon as societies, in forming, had invented any kind of police, that police invented mousetraps. As perhaps our readers are not familiar with the slang of the Rue de Jerusalem, and as it is 15 years since we applied this word for the first time to this thing, allow us to explain to them what is a mousetrap. When in a house, of whatever kind it may be, an individual suspected of any crime is arrested, the arrest is held secret. 4 or 5 men are placed in an ambuscade in the front room. The door is opened to all who knock. It is closed after them, and they are arrested, so that at the end of 2 or 3 days they have in their power almost all the habitués of the establishment. And that is a mousetrap. The apartment of Monsieur Bonacieux, then, became a mousetrap, and whoever appeared there was taken and interrogated by the cardinal's people. It must be observed that as a separate passage led to the first floor in which D'Artagnan lodged, those who called on him were exempted from this detention. Besides, nobody came thither but the 3 Musketeers. They had all been engaged in earnest search and inquiries, but had discovered nothing. Athos had even gone so far as to question M. de Tréville, a thing which, considering the habitual reticence of the worthy Musketeer, had very much astonished his captain. But M. de Tréville knew nothing, except that the last time he had seen the cardinal, the king, and the queen, the cardinal looked very thoughtful, the king uneasy, and the redness of the queen's eyes denoted that she had been sleepless or tearful. But this last circumstance was not striking, as the queen, since her marriage, had slept badly and wept much. M. de Tréville requested Athos, whatever might happen, to be observant of his duty to the king, but particularly to the queen, begging him to convey his desires to his comrades. As to D'Artagnan, he did not budge from his apartment. He converted his chamber into an observatory. From his windows he saw all the visitors who were caught. Then, having removed a plank from his floor, and nothing much remaining but a simple ceiling between him and the room beneath in which the interrogatories were made, he heard all that passed between the inquisitors and the accused. The interrogatories, preceded by a minute search operated upon the persons arrested, were almost always framed thus: "Has Madame Bonacieux sent anything to you for her husband or any other person? Has Monsieur Bonacieux sent anything to you for his wife or for any other person? Has either of them confided anything to you by word of mouth?" "If they knew anything, they would not question people in this manner," said D'Artagnan to himself. "Now, what is it they want to know? Why, they want to know if the Duke of Buckingham is in Paris, and if he has had, or is likely to have, an interview with the queen." D'Artagnan held on to this idea, which, from what he had heard, was not wanting in probability. In the meantime, the mousetrap continued in operation, and likewise D'Artagnan's vigilance. On the evening of the day after the arrest of poor Bonacieux, as Athos had just left D'Artagnan to report at M. de Tréville's, and as 9 o'clock had just struck, and as Planchet, who had not yet made the bed, was beginning his task, a knocking was heard at the street door. The door was instantly opened and shut. Someone was taken in the mousetrap. D'Artagnan flew to his hole, laid himself down on the floor at full length, and listened. Cries were soon heard, and then moans, which someone appeared to be endeavoring to stifle. There were no questions. "The devil!" said D'Artagnan to himself. "It seems like a woman. They search her, she resists, they use force. The scoundrels!" In spite of his prudence, D'Artagnan restrained himself with great difficulty from taking a part in the scene that was going on below. "But I tell you that I am the mistress of this house, gentlemen. I tell you I am Madame Bonacieux. I tell you I belong to the queen," cried the unfortunate woman. "Madame Bonacieux," murmured D'Artagnan. "Can I be so lucky as to find what everybody is seeking for?" The voice became more and more indistinct. A tumultuous movement shook the partition. The victim resisted as much as a woman could resist 4 men. "Pardon, gentlemen, murmured the voice, which could now only be heard in inarticulate sounds. "They are binding her. They are going to drag her away!" cried D'Artagnan to himself, springing up from the floor. "My sword! Good, it is by my side. Planchet!" "Monsieur?" "Run and seek Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. One of the 3 will certainly be at home, perhaps all 3. Tell them to take arms, to come here, and to run. Ah, I remember, Athos is at Monsieur de Tréville's." "But where are you going, monsieur? Where are you going?" "I am going down by the window, in order to be there the sooner," cried D'Artagnan. "You put back the boards, sweep the floor, go out at the door, and run as I told you." "Oh, monsieur, monsieur, you will kill yourself!" cried Planchet. "Hold your tongue, stupid fellow," said D'Artagnan, and laying hold of the casement, he let himself gently down from the first story, which fortunately was not very elevated, without doing himself the slightest injury. He then went straight to the door and knocked, murmuring, "I will go myself and be caught in the mousetrap, but woe be to the cats that shall pounce upon such a mouse." The knocker had scarcely sounded under the hand of the young man before the tumult ceased, steps approached, the door was opened, and D'Artagnan, sword in hand, rushed into the rooms of Monsieur Bonacieux, the door of which, doubtless acted upon by a spring, closed after him. Then those who dwelt in Bonacieux's unfortunate house, together with the nearest neighbors, heard loud cries, stamping of feet, clashing of swords, and breaking of furniture. A moment after, Those who, surprised by this tumult, had gone to their windows to learn the cause of it, saw the door open, and 4 men, clothed in black, not come out of it, but fly, like so many frightened crows, leaving on the ground and on the corners of the furniture feathers from their wings, that is to say, patches of their clothes and fragments of their cloaks. D'Artagnan was conqueror. Without much effort, it must be confessed, for only one of the officers was armed, and even he defended himself for form's sake. It is true that the 3 others had endeavored to knock the young man down with chairs, stools, and crockery, but 2 or 3 scratches made by Gascon's blade terrified them. 10 minutes sufficed for their defeat, and D'Artagnan remained master of the field of battle. The neighbors who had opened their windows, with the coolness particular to the inhabitants of Paris in these times of perpetual riots and disturbances, closed them again as soon as they saw the 4 men in black flee, their instinct telling them that for the time all was over. Besides, it began to grow late, and then, as today, people went to bed early in the quarter of Luxembourg. On being left alone with Mme. Bonacieux, D'Artagnan turned toward her. The poor woman reclined where she had been left, half fainting upon an armchair. D'Artagnan examined her with a rapid glance. She was a charming woman of 25 or 26 years, with dark hair, blue eyes, and a nose slightly turned up, admirable teeth, and a complexion marbled with rose and opal. There, however, ended the signs which might have confounded her with a lady of rank. The hands were white, but without delicacy. The feet did not bespeak the woman of quality. Happily, D'Artagnan was not yet acquainted with such niceties. While D'Artagnan was examining Mme. Bonacieux, and was, as we have said, close to her, he saw on the ground a fine cambric handkerchief, which he picked up, as was his habit, and at the corner of which he recognized the same cipher he had seen on the handkerchief which had nearly caused him and Aramis to cut each other's throat. From that time D'Artagnan had been cautious with respect to handkerchiefs with arms on them, and he therefore placed in the pocket of Mme. Bonacieux the one he had just picked up. At that moment Mme. Bonacieux recovered her senses. She opened her eyes, looked around her with terror, saw that the apartment was empty and that she was alone with her liberator. She extended her hands to him with a smile. Mme. Bonacieux had the sweetest smile in the world. "Ah, monsieur," said she, "you have saved me. Permit me to thank you." "Madame," said D'Artagnan, "I have only done what every gentleman would have done in my place. You owe me no thanks." "Oh, yes, monsieur, oh, yes! And I hope to prove to you that you have not served an ingrate. But what could these men, whom I at first took for robbers, want with me? And why is Monsieur Bonacieux not here?" "Madame, these men were more dangerous than any robbers could have been, for they are the agents of the cardinal. And as to your husband, Monsieur Bonacieux, he is not here because he was yesterday evening conducted to the Bastille." "My husband in the Bastille!" cried Mme. Bonacieux. "Oh, my God, what has he done? Poor dear man, he is innocence itself!" And something like a faint smile lighted the still terrified features of the young woman. "What has he done, madame?" said D'Artagnan. "I believe that his only crime is to have at the same time the good fortune and the misfortune to be your husband." "But, monsieur, you know, then—" "I know that you have been abducted, madame." "And by whom? Do you know him? Oh, if you know him, tell me!" "By a man of from 40 to 45 years, with black hair, a dark complexion, and a scar on his left temple." "That is he, that is he! But his name?" "Ah, his name, I do not know that." "And did my husband know I had been carried off?" "He was informed of it by a letter, written to him by the abductor himself." "And does he suspect," said Mme. Bonacieux with some embarrassment, "the cause of this event?" "He attributed it, I believe, to a political cause." "I doubted from the first, and now I think entirely as he does. Then my dear Monsieur Bonacieux has not suspected me a single instant?" "So far from it, madame, he was too proud of your prudence, and above all, of your love." A second smile, almost imperceptible, stole over the rosy lips of the pretty young woman. "But continued D'Artagnan, "how did you escape?" "I took advantage of a moment when they left me alone, and as I had known since morning the reason of my abduction, with the help of the sheets I let myself down from the window. Then, as I believed my husband would be at home, I hastened hither." "To place yourself under his protection?" "Oh, no, poor dear man! I knew very well that he was incapable of defending me; but as he could serve us in other ways, I wished to inform him." "Of what?" "Oh, that is not my secret. I must not, therefore, tell you." "Besides," said D'Artagnan, "pardon me, madame, if, guardsman as I am, I remind you of prudence. Besides, I believe we are not here in a very proper place for imparting confidences. The men I have put to flight will return reinforced. If they find us here, we are lost. I have sent for 3 of my friends, but who knows whether they were at home?" "Yes, yes, you are right!" cried the affrighted Mme. Bonacieux. "Let us fly! Let us save ourselves!" At these words she passed her arm under that of D'Artagnan, and urged him forward eagerly. "But whither shall we fly? Whither escape?" "Let us first withdraw from this house; afterward we shall see." The young man and the young woman, without taking the trouble to shut the door after them, descended into the Rue des Fossoyeurs rapidly, turned into the Rue des Fossés Monsieur le Prince, and did not stop till they came to the Place Saint-Sulpice. "And now what are we to do, and where do you wish me to conduct you?" asked D'Artagnan. "I am quite at a loss how to answer you, I admit," said Mme. Bonacieux. "My intention was to inform Monsieur Laporte, through my husband, in order that Monsieur Laporte might tell us precisely what had taken place at the Louvre in the last 3 days, and whether there is any danger in presenting myself there." "But I," said D'Artagnan, "can go and inform Monsieur Laporte." "No doubt you could, only there is one misfortune, and that is that Monsieur Bonacieux is known at the Louvre, and would be allowed to pass, whereas you are not known there, and the gate would be closed against you." "Ah, bah!" said D'Artagnan. "You have at some wicket of the Louvre a concierge who is devoted to you, and who, thanks to a password, would—" Mme. Bonacieux looked earnestly at the young man. "And if I give you this password," said she, "would you forget it as soon as you used it?" "By my honor, by the faith of a gentleman," said D'Artagnan, with an accent so truthful that no one could mistake it. "Then I believe you. You appear to be a brave young man. Besides, your fortune may perhaps be the result of your devotedness." "I will do, without a promise and voluntarily, all that I can do to serve the king and be agreeable to the queen. Dispose of me, then, as a friend." "But where shall I go meanwhile?" "Is there nobody from whose house Monsieur Laporte can come and fetch you?" "No, I can trust nobody." "Stop," said D'Artagnan, "we are near Athos's door. Yes, here it is." "Who is this Athos?" "One of my friends." "But if he should be at home and see me—" "He's not at home, and I will carry away the key, after having placed you in his apartment." "But if he should return?" "Oh, he won't return; and if he should, he will be told that I have brought a woman with me, and that woman is in his apartment." "But that will compromise me sadly, you know." "Of what consequence? Nobody knows you. Besides, we are in a situation to overlook ceremony." "Come, then, let us go to your friend's house. Where does he live?" "Rue Férou, 2 steps from here." "Let us go." Both resumed their way. As D'Artagnan had foreseen, Athos was not within. He took the key, which was customarily given him as one of the family, ascended the stairs, and introduced Mme. Bonacieux into the little apartment of which we have given a description. "You are at home," said he. "Remain here, fasten the door inside, and open it to nobody unless you hear 3 taps like this," and he tapped thrice, 2 taps close together and pretty hard, the other after an interval, and lighter. "That is well," said Mme. Bonacieux. "Now, in my turn, let me give you my instructions." "I am all attention." "Present yourself at the wicket of the Louvre on the side of the Rue de l'Echelle, and ask for Germain." "Well, and then?" "He will ask you what you want. and you will answer by these two words, Tours and Brussels. He will at once put himself at your orders." "And what shall I command him?" "To go and fetch Monsieur Laporte, the queen's valet de chambre." "And when he shall have informed him and Monsieur Laporte is come—" "You will send him to me." "That is well; but where and how shall I see you again?" "Do you wish to see me again?" "Certainly." "Well, let that care be mine, and be at ease." "I depend upon your word." "You may." D'Artagnan bowed to Mme. Bonacieux, darting at her the most loving glance that he could possibly concentrate upon her charming little person; and while he descended the stairs, he heard the door closed and double locked. In 2 bounds he was at the Louvre. As he entered the wicket of l'Echelle, 10 o'clock struck. All the events we have described had taken place within a half hour. Everything fell out as Mme. Bonacieux prophesied. On hearing the password, Germain bowed. In a few minutes, Laporte was at the lodge. In 2 words, D'Artagnan informed him where Mme. Bonacieux was. Laporte assured himself, by having it twice repeated, of the accurate address, and set off at a run. Hardly, however, had he taken 10 steps before he returned. "Young man," said he to D'Artagnan, "a suggestion." "What?" "You may get into trouble by what has taken place." "You believe so?" "Yes. Have you any friend whose clock is too slow?" "Well?" "Go and call upon him in order that he may give evidence of your having been with him at 9:30. In a court of justice, that is called an alibi." D'Artagnan found his advice prudent. He took to his heels and was soon at M. de Tréville's, but instead of going into the saloon with the rest of the crowd, he asked to be introduced to M. de Tréville's office. As D'Artagnan so constantly frequented the hôtel, no difficulty was made in complying with his request, and a servant went to inform M. de Tréville that his young compatriot, having something important to communicate, solicited a private audience. 5 minutes after, M. de Tréville was asking D'Artagnan what he could do to serve him, and what caused his visit at so late an hour. "Pardon me, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, who had profited by the moment he had been left alone to put back M. de Tréville's clock 3/4 of an hour. "But I thought, as it was yet only 25 minutes past 9, it was not too late to wait upon you." "25 minutes past 9!" cried M. de Tréville, looking at the clock. "Why, that's impossible." "Look rather, monsieur," said D'Artagnan. "The clock shows it." "That's true," said M. de Tréville. "I believed it later. But what can I do for you?" Then D'Artagnan told M. de Tréville a long history about the queen. He expressed to him the fears he entertained with respect to her Majesty. He related to him what he had heard of the projects of the cardinal with regard to Buckingham, and all with a tranquillity and candor of which M. de Tréville was more the dupe, from having himself, as we had said, observed something fresh between the cardinal, the king, and the queen. As 10 o'clock was striking, D'Artagnan left M. de Tréville, who thanked him for his information, recommended him to have the service of the king and queen always at heart, and returned to the saloon. But at the foot of the stairs, D'Artagnan remembered he had forgotten his cane. He consequently sprang up again, re-entered the office, with a turn of his finger set the clock right again, that it might not be perceived the next day that it had been put wrong, and certain from that time that he had a witness to prove his alibi, he ran downstairs, and soon found himself in the street. End of chapter 10. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Meredith Hughes, Cambridge, Massachusetts. The Three Musketeers, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 11, in which the plot thickens. His visit to M. de Tréville being paid, the pensive D'Artagnan took the longest way homeward. On what was D'Artagnan thinking? that he strayed thus from his path, gazing at the stars of heaven, and sometimes sighing, sometimes smiling. He was thinking of Madame Bonacieux. For an apprentice Musketeer, the young woman was almost an ideal of love. Pretty, mysterious, initiated in almost all the secrets of the court, which reflected such a charming gravity over her pleasing features, it might be surmised that she was not wholly unmoved. And this is an irresistible charm to novices in love. Moreover, D'Artagnan had delivered her from the hands of the demons who wished to search and ill-treat her, and this important service had established between them one of those sentiments of gratitude which so easily assume a more tender character. D'Artagnan already fancied himself, so rapid is the flight of our dreams upon the wings of imagination, accosted by a messenger from the young woman, who brought him some billet appointing a meeting, a gold chain, or a diamond. We have observed that young cavaliers received presents from their king without shame. Let us add that in these times of lax morality they had no more delicacy with respect to the mistresses, and that the latter almost always left them valuable and durable remembrances, as if they essayed to conquer the fragility of their sentiments by the solidity of their gifts. Without a blush, men made their way in the world by the means of women blushing. Such as were only beautiful gave their beauty, whence, without doubt, comes the proverb, "The most beautiful girl in the world can only give what she has." Such as were rich gave in addition a part of their money, and a vast number of heroes of that gallant period may be cited who would neither have won their spurs in the first place nor their battles afterward without the purse, more or less furnished, which their mistress fastened to the saddle-bow. D'Artagnan owned nothing. Provincial diffidence, that slight varnish, the ephemeral flower, that down of the peach, had evaporated to the winds through the little orthodox counsels which the Three Musketeers gave their friend. D'Artagnan, following the strange custom of the times, considered himself at Paris as on a campaign, neither more nor less than if he had been in Flanders, Spain yonder, woman here. In each there was an enemy to contend with, and contributions to be levied. But we must say, at the present moment, D'Artagnan was ruled by a feeling much more noble and disinterested. The mercer had said that he was rich. The young man might easily guess that, with so weak a man as Madame Bonacieux, and interest was almost foreign to this commencement of love, which had been the consequence of it. We say almost, for the idea that a young, handsome, kind, and witty woman is at the same time rich takes nothing from the beginning of love, but on the contrary strengthens it. There are in affluence a crowd of aristocratic cares and caprices which are highly becoming to beauty. A fine and white stocking, a silken robe, a lace kerchief, a pretty slipper on the foot, a tasty ribbon on the head do not make an ugly woman pretty, but they make a pretty woman beautiful, without reckoning the hands, which gain by all this. The hands, among women particularly, to be beautiful, must be idle. Then D'Artagnan, as the reader from whom we have not concealed the state of his fortune very well knows, D'Artagnan was not a millionaire. He hoped to become one some day, but the time which in his own mind he fixed upon for this happy change was still far distant. In the meanwhile, how disheartening to see the woman one loves long for those thousands of nothings which constitute a woman's happiness, and be unable to give her those thousands of nothings. At least, when the woman is rich and the lover is not, that which he cannot offer she offers to herself, and although it is generally with her husband's money that she procures herself this indulgence, the gratitude for it seldom reverts to him. Then D'Artagnan, disposed to become the most tender of lovers, was at the same time a very devoted friend. In the midst of his amorous projects for the mercer's wife, he did not forget his friends. The pretty Madame Bonacieux was just the woman to walk with in the Plain St. Denis, or in the Fair of St. Germain, in company with Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, to whom D'Artagnan had often remarked this. Then one could enjoy charming little dinners, where one touches on one side of the hand of a friend, and on the other the foot of a mistress. Besides, on pressing occasions, in extreme difficulties, D'Artagnan would become the preserver of his friends. And Monsieur Bonacieux? whom D'Artagnan had pushed into the hands of the officers, denying him aloud, although he had promised in a whisper to save him. We are compelled to admit to our readers that D'Artagnan thought nothing about him in any way, or that if he did think of him, it was only to say to himself that he was very well where he was, wherever it might be. Love is the most selfish of all the passions. Let our readers reassure themselves. If D'Artagnan forgets his host, or appears to forget him under the pretense of not knowing where he has been carried, we will not forget him, and we know where he is. But for the moment, let us do as did the amorous Gascon. We will see after the worthy mercer later. D'Artagnan, reflecting on his future amours, addressing himself to the beautiful night and smiling at the stars, ascended the Rue Cherish-Midi, or Chase-Midi, as it was then called. As he found himself in the quarter in which Aramis lived, he took it into his head to pay his friend a visit in order to explain the motives which had led him to send Planchet with a request that he would come immediately into the mousetrap. Now, if Aramis had been at home when Planchet came to his abode, he had doubtless hastened to the Rue des Fossoyeurs, and finding nobody there but his other two companions perhaps, they would not be able to conceive what all this meant. This mystery required an explanation. At least, so D'Artagnan declared to himself. He likewise thought this was an opportunity for talking about pretty little Madame Bonacieux, of whom his head, if not his heart, was already full. We must never look for discretion in first love. First love is accompanied by such excessive joy that unless the joy be allowed to overflow, it will stifle you. Paris, for 2 hours past, had been dark and seemed a desert. 11 o'clock sounded from all the clocks in the Faubourg Saint-Germain. It was delightful weather. D'Artagnan was passing along a lane on the spot where the Rue d'Assas is now situated, breathing the balmy emanations which were borne upon the wind from the Rue de Vaugirard, and which arose from the gardens refreshed by the dews of evening and the breeze of night. From a distance resounded, deadened, however, by good shutters, the songs of the tipplers, enjoying themselves in the cabarets scattered along the plain. Arrived at the end of the lane, D'Artagnan turned to the left. The house in which Aramis dwelt was situated between the Rue Cassette and the Rue Servandoni. D'Artagnan had just passed the Rue Cassette, and had already perceived the door of his friend's house, shaded by a mass of sycamores and clematis which formed a vast arch opposite the front of it, when he perceived something like a shadow issuing from the Rue Servandoni. This something was enveloped in a cloak, and D'Artagnan at first believed it was a man. But by the smallness of the form, the hesitation of the walk, and the indecision of the step, he soon discovered that it was a woman. Further, this woman, as if not certain of the house she was seeking, lifted up her eyes to look around her, stopped, went backward, and then returned again. D'Artagnan was perplexed. "Shall I go and offer her my services?" thought he. "By her step she must be young. Perhaps she is pretty. Oh, yes! But a woman who wanders in the streets at this hour only ventures out to meet her lover. If I should disturb a rendezvous, that would not be the best means of commencing an acquaintance." Meantime, the young woman continued to advance, counting the houses and windows. This was neither long nor difficult. There were but 3 hotels in this part of the street, and only 2 windows looking toward the road, one of which was in a pavilion parallel to that which Aramis occupied, the other belonging to Aramis himself. "Pardieu!" said D'Artagnan to himself, to whose mind the niece of the theologian reverted. "Pardieu! It would be droll if this belated dove should be in search of our friend's house. But on my soul, it looks so. Ah, my dear Aramis, this time I shall find you out." And D'Artagnan, making himself as small as he could, concealed himself in the darkest side of the street near a stone bench placed at the back of a niche. The young woman continued to advance, and in addition to the lightness of her step, which had betrayed her, she emitted a little cough which denoted a sweet voice. D'Artagnan believed this cough to be a signal. Nevertheless, whether the cough had been answered by a similar signal which had fixed the irresolution of the nocturnal seeker, or whether without this aid she saw that she had arrived at the end of her journey, she resolutely drew near to Aramis's shutter, and tapped, at 3 equal intervals, with her bent finger. "This is all very fine, dear Aramis," murmured D'Artagnan. "Ah, monsieur hypocrite, I understand how you study theology." The 3 blows were scarcely struck when the inside blind was opened and a light appeared through the panes of the outside shutter. "Ah, ah!" said the listener, "not through doors, but through windows. Ah, this visit was expected. We shall see the windows open and the lady enter by escalade. Very pretty." But, to the great astonishment of D'Artagnan, the shutter remained closed. Still more, the light which had shone for an instant disappeared, and all was again in obscurity. D'Artagnan thought this could not last long, and continued to look with all his eyes and listen with all his ears. He was right. At the end of some seconds, 2 sharp taps were heard inside. The young woman in the street replied by a single tap, and the shutter was opened a little way. It may be judged whether D'Artagnan looked or listened with avidity. Unfortunately, the light had been removed into another chamber. But the eyes of the young man were accustomed to the night. Besides, the eyes of the Gascons have, as it is asserted, like those of cats, the faculty of seeing in the dark. D'Artagnan then saw that the young woman took from her pocket a white object, which she unfolded quickly, and which took the form of a handkerchief. She made her interlocutor observe the corner of this unfolded object. This immediately recalled to D'Artagnan's mind the handkerchief which he had found at the feet of Mme. Bonacieux, which had reminded him of that which he had dragged from under the feet of Aramis. What the devil could that handkerchief signify? Placed where he was, D'Artagnan could not perceive the face of Aramis. We say Aramis because the young man entertained no doubt that it was his friend who held this dialogue from the interior with the lady of the exterior. Curiosity prevailed over prudence, and profiting by the preoccupation into which the sight of the handkerchief appeared to have plunged the 2 personages now on the scene, he stole from his hiding-place, and quick as lightning, but stepping with utmost caution, he ran and placed himself close to the angle of the wall, from which his eyes could pierce the interior of Aramis's room. Upon gaining this advantage, D'Artagnan was near uttering a cry of surprise. It was not Aramis who was conversing with the nocturnal visitor; it was a woman. D'Artagnan, however, could only see enough to recognize the form of her vestments, not enough to distinguish her features. At the same instant, the woman inside drew a second handkerchief from her pocket, and exchanged it for that which had just been shown to her. Then some words were spoken by the 2 women. At length the shutter closed. The woman who was outside the window turned round and passed within 4 steps of D'Artagnan, pulling down the hood of her mantle. But the precaution was too late. D'Artagnan had already recognized Mme. Bonacieux. Mme. Bonacieux! The suspicion that it was she had crossed the mind of D'Artagnan when she saw the handkerchief from her pocket. But what probability was there that Mme. Bonacieux, who had sent for Monsieur Laporte in order to be reconducted to the Louvre, should be running about the streets of Paris at 11:30 at night, at the risk of being abducted a second time? This must be, then, an affair of importance. And what is the most important affair to a woman of 25? Love. But was it on her own account, or on account of another, that she exposed herself to such hazards? This was a question the young man asked himself, whom the demon of jealousy already gnawed, being in heart neither more nor less than an accepted lover. There was a very simple means of satisfying himself whether Mme. Bonacieux was going. That was to follow her. This method was so simple that D'Artagnan employed it quite naturally and instinctively. But at the sight of the young man, who detached himself from the wall like a statue walking from its niche, and at the noise of the steps which she heard resound behind her, Mme. Bonacieux uttered a little cry and fled. D'Artagnan ran after her. It was not difficult for him to overtake a woman embarrassed with her cloak. He came up with her before she had traversed a third of the street. The unfortunate woman was exhausted, not by fatigue, but by terror, and when D'Artagnan placed his hand upon her shoulder, she sank upon one knee, crying in a choking voice, "Kill me if you please! You shall know nothing!" D'Artagnan raised her by passing his arm round her waist; but as he felt by her weight she was on the point of fainting, he made haste to reassure her by protestations of devotedness. These protestations were nothing for Mme. Bonacieux, for such protestations may be made with the worst intentions in the world; but the voice was all. Mme. Bonacieux thought she recognized the sound of that voice. She reopened her eyes, cast a quick glance upon the man who had terrified her so, and at once perceiving it was D'Artagnan, she uttered a cry of joy. "Oh, it is you! It is you! Thank God! Thank God!" "Yes, it is I," said D'Artagnan. "It is I, whom God has sent to watch over you." "Was it with that intention you followed me?" asked the young woman, with a coquettish smile, whose somewhat bantering character resumed its influence, and with whom all fear had disappeared from the moment in which she recognized a friend in one she had taken for an enemy. "No," said D'Artagnan, "no, I confess it. It was chance that threw me in your way. I saw a woman knocking at the window of one of my friends." "One of your friends?" interrupted Mme. Bonacieux. "Without doubt. Aramis is one of my best friends." "Aramis? Who is he?" "Come, come, you won't tell me you don't know Aramis?" "This is the first time that I ever heard his name pronounced." "It is the first time, then, that you ever went to that house?" "Undoubtedly." "And you did not know that it was inhabited by a young man?" "No." "By a Musketeer?" "No, indeed." "It was not he, then, that you came to seek?" "Not the least in the world. Besides, you must have seen that the person to whom I spoke was a woman." "That is true; but this woman is a friend of Aramis." "I know nothing of that." "Since she lodges with him." "That does not concern me." "But who is she?" "Oh, that is not my secret." "My dear Madame Bonacieux, you are charming, but at the same time you are one of the most mysterious women." "Do I lose by that?" "No, you are, on the contrary, adorable." "Give me your arm, then." "Most willingly. And now?" "Now escort me." "Where?" "Where I am going." "But where are you going?" "You will see, because you will leave me at the door." "Shall I wait for you?" "That will be useless." "You will return alone, then?" "Perhaps yes, perhaps no." "But will the person who shall accompany you afterward be a man or a woman?" "I don't know yet." "But I will know it." "How so?" "I will wait until you come out." "In that case, adieu." "Why so? I do not want you. But you have claimed the aid of a gentleman, not the watchfulness of a spy. The word is rather hard." "How are they called who follow others in spite of them?" "They are indiscreet." "The word is too mild." "Well, madame, I perceive I must do as you wish." "Why did you deprive yourself of the merit of doing so at once?" "Is there no merit in repentance?" "And do you really repent?" "I know nothing about it myself, but what I know is that I promise to do all that you wish if you allow me to accompany you where you are going." "And you will leave me then?" "Yes." "Without waiting for my coming out again?" "Yes." "Word of honor?" "By the faith of a gentleman. Take my arm and let us go." D'Artagnan offered his arm to Mme. Bonacieux, who willingly took it, half laughing, half trembling, and both gained the top of the Rue de la Harpe. Arriving there, the young woman seemed to hesitate, as she had done before in the Rue Vaugirard. She seemed, however, by certain signs, to recognize a door, and approaching that door, "And now, monsieur," said she, "it is here I have business. A thousand thanks for your honorable company, which has saved me from all the dangers to which, alone, I was exposed. But that moment is come to keep your word. I have reached my destination." "And you will have nothing to fear on your return?" "I shall have nothing to fear but robbers." "And that is nothing?" "What could they take from me? I have not a penny about me." "You forget that beautiful handkerchief with the coat of arms." "Which?" "That which I found at your feet and replaced in your pocket. Hold your tongue, imprudent man! Do you wish to destroy me?" "You see very plainly that there is still danger for you, since a single word makes you tremble, and you confess that if that word were heard you would be ruined." "Come, come, madame!" cried D'Artagnan, seizing her hands and surveying her with an ardent glance. "Come, be more generous. Confide in me. Have you not read in my eyes that there is nothing but devotion and sympathy in my heart?" "Yes," replied Mme. Bonacieux. "Therefore ask my own secrets, and I will reveal them to you. But those of others, that is quite another thing." "Very well," said D'Artagnan, "I shall discover them. As these secrets may have an influence over your life, these secrets must become mine." "Beware of what you do!" cried the young woman, in a manner so serious as to make D'Artagnan start in spite of himself. "Oh, meddle in nothing which concerns me. Do not seek to assist me in that matter which I am accomplishing. This I ask of you in the name of the interest with which I inspire you, in the name of the service you have rendered me, and which I shall never forget while I have life. Rather, place faith in what I tell you. Have no more concern about me. I exist no longer for you, any more than if you had never seen me." "Must Aramis do as much as I, madame?" said D'Artagnan, deeply piqued. "This is the second or third time, monsieur, that you have repeated that name, and yet I have told you that I do not know him." "You do not know the man at whose shutter you have just knocked? Indeed, madame, you believe me too credulous." "Confess that it is for the sake of making me talk that you invent this story and create this personage." "I invent nothing, madame. I create nothing. I only speak the exact truth." "And you say that one of your friends lives in that house?" "I say so, and I repeat it for the third time. That house is one inhabited by my friend, and that friend is Aramis." "All this will be cleared up at a later period," murmured the young woman. "No, monsieur, be silent." "If you could see my heart," said D'Artagnan, "you would there read so much curiosity that you would pity me, and so much love that you would instantly satisfy my curiosity. We have nothing to fear from those who love us." "You speak very suddenly of love," said the young woman, shaking her head. "That is because love has come suddenly upon me, and for the first time, and because I am only 20." The young woman looked at him furtively. "Listen, I am already upon the scent," resumed D'Artagnan. "About 3 months ago I was near having a duel with Aramis concerning a handkerchief resembling the one you showed to the woman in his house. For a handkerchief marked in the same manner, I am sure." "Monsieur," said the young woman, "you weary me very much, I assure you, with your questions." "But you, madame, prudent as you are, think, if you were to be arrested with that handkerchief, and that handkerchief were to be seized, would you not be compromised?" "In what way? The initials are only mine, C.B. Constance Bonacieux." "Or Camille de Bois Tracy." "Silence, monsieur! Once again, silence! Ah, since the dangers I incur on my own account cannot stop you, think of those you may yourself run." "Me?" "Yes, there is peril of imprisonment, risk of life, in knowing me." "Then I will not leave you." "Monsieur," said the young woman, supplicating him and clasping her hands together, "monsieur, in the name of heaven, by the honor of a soldier, by the courtesy of a gentleman, depart. There midnight sounds. That is the hour when I am expected." "Madame," said the young man, bowing, "I can refuse nothing asked of me thus. Be content, I will depart." "But you will not follow me? You will not watch me?" "I will return home instantly." "Ah, I was quite sure you were a good and brave young man," said Mme. Bonacieux, holding out her hand to him, and placing the other upon the knocker of a little door almost hidden in the wall. D'Artagnan seized the hand held out to him, and kissed it ardently. "Ah, I wish I had never seen you!" cried D'Artagnan, with that ingenuous roughness which women often prefer to the affectations of politeness, because it betrays the depths of the thought and proves that feeling prevails over reason. "Well," resumed Mme. Bonacieux, in a voice almost caressing, and pressing the hand of D'Artagnan, who had not relinquished hers, "well, I will not say as much as you do. What is lost for today may not be lost forever. Who knows when I shall be at liberty, that I may not satisfy your curiosity?" "And will you make the same promise to my love?" cried D'Artagnan, beside himself with joy. "Oh, as to that, I do not engage myself. That depends upon the sentiments with which you may inspire me." "Then today, madame—" "Oh, today I am no further than gratitude." "Ah, you are too charming," said D'Artagnan sorrowfully, "and you abuse my love." "No, I use your generosity, that's all. But be of good cheer. With certain people everything comes round." "Oh, you render me the happiest of men. Do not forget this evening. Do not forget that promise." "Be satisfied. In the proper time and place I will remember everything. Now then, go, go, in the name of heaven! I was expected at sharp midnight, and I am late." "By 5 minutes." "Yes, but in certain circumstances 5 minutes are 5 ages." "When one loves." "Well, and who told you I had no affair with a lover?" "It is a man, then, who expects you?" cried D'Artagnan. "A man?" "The discussion is going to begin again," said Mme. Bonacieux, with a half smile which was not exempt from a tinge of impatience. "No, no, I go, I depart. I believe in you, and I would have all the merit of my devotion, even if that devotion were stupidity. Adieu, madame, adieu." And as if he only felt strength to detach himself by a violent effort from the hand he held, he sprang away, running, while Mme. Bonacieux knocked, as at the shutter, 3 light and regular taps. When he had gained the angle of the street, he turned. The door had been opened and shut again. The mercer's pretty wife had disappeared. D'Artagnan pursued his way. He had given his word not to watch Mme. Bonacieux, and if his life had depended upon the spot to which she was going or upon the person who should accompany her, D'Artagnan would have returned home, since he had so promised. 5 minutes later, he was in the Rue des Fossoyeurs. "Poor Athos," said he, "he will never guess what all this means. He will have fallen asleep waiting for me, or else he will have returned home, where he will have learned that a woman had been there. A woman with Athos! After all," continued D'Artagnan, "there was certainly one with Aramis. All this is very strange, and I am curious to know how it will end." "Badly, monsieur, badly," replied a voice, which the young man recognized as that of Planchet, for, soliloquizing aloud, as very preoccupied people do, he had entered the alley, at the end of which were the stairs which led to his chamber. "How badly? What do you mean by that, you idiot?" asked D'Artagnan. "What has happened?" "All sorts of misfortunes." "What?" "In the first place, Monsieur Athos is arrested." "Arrested? Athos arrested? What for?" "He was found in your lodging. They took him for you." "And by whom was he arrested?" "By guards brought by the men in black whom you put to flight." "Why did he not tell them his name? Why did he not tell them he knew nothing about this affair?" "He took care not to do so, monsieur. On the contrary, he came up to me and said, 'It is your master that needs his liberty at this moment, and not I, since he knows everything and I know nothing. They will believe he is arrested, and that will give him time. In 3 days I will tell them who I am, and they cannot fail to let me go.'" "Brave Athos! Noble heart!" murmured D'Artagnan. "I know him well there. And what did the officers do?" "4 conveyed him away, I don't know where, to the Bastille or Fort l'Evêque. 2 remained with the men in black, who rummaged every place and took all the papers. The last 2 mounted guard at the door during this examination. Then, when all was over, they went away, leaving the house empty and exposed." "And Porthos and Aramis?" "I could not find them. They did not come." "But they may come any moment, for you left word that I awaited them." "Yes, monsieur." "Well, don't budge, then. If they come, tell them what has happened. Let them wait for me at the Pomme de Pin. Here it would be dangerous; the house may be watched. I will run to Monsieur de Tréville to tell them all this, and will meet them there." "Very well, monsieur," said Planchet. "But you will remain? You are not afraid?" said D'Artagnan, coming back to recommend courage to his lackey. "Be easy, monsieur," said Planchet. "You do not know me yet. I am brave when I set about it. It is all in beginning. Besides, I am a Picard." "Then it is understood," said D'Artagnan. "You would rather be killed than desert your post?" "Yes, monsieur, and there is nothing I would not do to prove to monsieur that I am attached to him." "Good," said D'Artagnan to himself. "It appears that the method I have adopted with this boy is decidedly the best. I shall use it again upon occasion." And with all the swiftness of his legs, already a little fatigued, however, with the perambulations of the day, D'Artagnan directed his course toward M. de Tréville's. M. de Tréville was not at his hôtel. His company was on guard at the Louvre; he was at the Louvre with his company. It was necessary to reach M. de Tréville; it was important that he should be informed of what was passing. D'Artagnan resolved to try and enter the Louvre. His costume of guardsman in the company of M. Dessessart ought to be his passport. He therefore went down the Rue des Petits Augustins and came up to the quay, in order to take the new bridge. He had at first an idea of crossing by the ferry, but on gaining the riverside he had mechanically put his hand into his pocket, and perceived that he had not wherewithal to pay his passage. As he gained the top of the Rue Guénégaud, he saw two persons coming out of the Rue Dauphine, whose appearance very much struck him. Of the two persons who composed this group, one was a man and the other a woman. The woman had the outline of Mme. Bonacieux. The man resembled Aramis, so much as to be mistaken for him. Besides, the woman wore that black mantle which D'Artagnan could still see outlined on the shutter of the Rue de Vaugirard and on the door of the Rue de la Harpe. Still further, the man wore the uniform of a Musketeer. The woman's hood was pulled down, and the man held a handkerchief to his face. Both, as this double precaution indicated, had an interest in not being recognized. They took the bridge. That was D'Artagnan's road, as he was going to the Louvre. D'Artagnan followed them. He had not gone 20 steps before he became convinced that the woman really was Mme. Bonacieux, and that the man was Aramis. He felt at that instant all the suspicions of jealousy agitating his heart. He felt himself doubly betrayed, by his friend and by her whom he already loved like a mistress. Mme. Bonacieux had declared to him, by all the gods, that she did not know Aramis, and a quarter of an hour after having made this assertion, he found her hanging on the arm of Aramis. D'Artagnan did not reflect that he had only known the mercer's pretty wife for 3 hours, that she owed him nothing but a little gratitude for having delivered her from the men in black, who wished to carry her off, and that she had promised him nothing. He considered himself an outraged, betrayed, and ridiculed lover. Blood and anger mounted to his face; he was resolved to unravel the mystery. The young man and young woman perceived they were watched, and redoubled their speed. D'Artagnan determined upon his course. He passed them, then returned so as to meet them exactly before the Samaritaine, which was illuminated by a lamp which threw its light all over that part of the bridge. D'Artagnan stopped before them, and they stopped before him. "What do you want, monsieur?" demanded the Musketeer, recoiling a step, and with a foreign accent, which proved to D'Artagnan that he was deceived in one of his conjectures. "It is not Aramis," cried he. "No, monsieur, it is not Aramis, and by your exclamation I perceive you have mistaken me for another, and pardon you." "You pardon me?" cried D'Artagnan. "Yes," replied the stranger. "Allow me, then, to pass on, since it is not with me you have anything to do." "You are right, monsieur, it is not with you that I have anything to do. It is with Madame." "With Madame? You do not know her," replied the stranger. "You are deceived, monsieur. I know her very well." "Ah," said Mme. Bonacieux, in a tone of reproach, "ah, monsieur, I had your promise as a soldier and your word as a gentleman. I hoped to be able to rely upon that." "And I, madame," said D'Artagnan, embarrassed, "you promised me—" "Take my arm, madame," said the stranger, "and let us continue our way." D'Artagnan, however, stupefied, cast down, annihilated by all that happened, stood with crossed arms before the Musketeer and Mme. Bonacieux. The Musketeer advanced 2 steps, and pushed D'Artagnan aside with his hand. D'Artagnan made a spring backward and drew his sword. At the same time, with the rapidity of lightning, the stranger drew his. "In the name of heaven, my lord!" cried Mme. Bonacieux, throwing herself between the combatants and seizing the swords with her hands. "My lord!" cried D'Artagnan, enlightened by a sudden idea. My lord! Pardon me, monsieur, but you are not—" "My lord, the Duke of Buckingham," said Mme. Bonacieux in an undertone, "and now you may ruin us all." "My lord, madame, I ask 100 pardons. But I love her, my lord, and was jealous. You know what it is to love, my lord. Pardon me, and then tell me how I can risk my life to serve your Grace." "You are a brave young man," said Buckingham, holding out his hand to D'Artagnan, who pressed it respectfully. "You offer me your services; with the same frankness I accept them. Follow us at a distance of 20 paces, as far as the Louvre, and if anyone watches us, slay him." D'Artagnan placed his naked sword under his arm, allowed the duke and Mme. Bonacieux to take 20 steps ahead, and then followed them, ready to execute the instructions of the noble and elegant minister of Charles I. Fortunately, he had no opportunity to give the duke this proof of his devotion, and the young woman and the handsome Musketeer entered the Louvre by the wicket of the Echelle without any interference. As for D'Artagnan, he immediately repaired to the cabaret of the Pomme de Pin, where he found Porthos and Aramis awaiting him. Without giving them any explanation of the alarm and inconvenience he had caused them, he told them that he had terminated the affair alone, in which he had for a moment believed he should need their assistance. Meanwhile, carried away as we are by our narrative, we must leave our three friends to themselves, and follow the Duke of Buckingham and his guide through the labyrinths of the Louvre. Chapter 11